Hello and welcome back to this week's podcast episode. I'm your host, Sydney, and I'm so thankful that you guys clicked on this week's episode, video, whatever. Happy to have you here. So this week's episode is really based on inspiration from a lot of different things. So this week, the first thing that really inspired me to make this episode was this podcast about Solid Core, or the owner of Solid Core, and how she came about building her business, building her empire, we should say, and kind of just how she grew into that career and the steps that it took to get there. And so if you guys don't know, this owner, let me just actually research her name because I feel like it would be a major disservice to not do so. So her name is Anne Mallon. And so before she got into Solid Core and created that business model and got into that whole, aspect, the biggest thing that stood out to me from that episode in her growth was that she basically decided to start a running program for these individuals in a rehab facility, something of that nature, who were recovering addicts. And in doing that, she kind of built this passion for exercise, or for, working in exercise and stuff like that, I believe. But before that, she had been kind of going at it from the political side. And so when she created this running program, nonprofit, for these, recovering addicts that wanted to, show that they could be outstanding citizens, they could be, people worth hiring and people worth taking a chance on. A lot of that had to do with their commitment and their drive and their, wanting to have that baseline ambition. And so one really big quote that stuck with me, and that's going to kind of outline what this week's topic is about, is that the biggest common thought in this group was that they were sick and tired of being sick and tired. Now, I just loved this quote. I love this quote because it kind of reminds us and brings us back in a way that's going to force us to be self-aware. A lot of the time when we're in periods of not having a lot of drive, not having a lot of ambition, not having a lot of, will to chase our dreams or to, step outside of our comfort zones, even in small ways, there's a big danger in the comfort zone that I think that we should mention. And this episode is honestly as big of a lesson for the listener, whoever you are, but also for me. I'm going to come back to this episode because I think we all need this reminder every once in a while, at least people who kind of think like me. So I'm saying that because I've talked about on the podcast a lot about the importance of slow living, the importance of, boredom. Boredom is important, being able to move slowly and intentionally, and having that be at the forefront of our day-to-day lives. That is important, and it does have value in our day-to-day lives. However, I think that it's difficult for me, I'm speaking for myself here, it's difficult for me to live my life completely in that way just because I am a person that needs to, check something off a list, that needs to complete something, that needs to feel like I'm making an impact or I'm helping someone out, or, what I'm trying to say. Like, I don't know how content I would be with a life spent in my current situation for 60 years and having done nothing else. Like, that's not the life I'm trying to live. And while it could be a neurologically regulated manner of living, right? We're not being very stressed, we're constantly in our comfort zone. I feel like a lot of frustration would build, in my psyche. And so I feel like when you have this kind of mentality like mine, maybe you do too, maybe you also want to, find a purpose, or you also want to, recover that drive, recover that ambition, and kind of, do something with your life rather than, it's very easy to stick in that comfort zone. And the reason for that is that the more comfortable you are with your current situation and your current circumstances, the more comfort that gives you, the less you're going to want to push outside of your comfort zone, and the less you're going to take a leap of faith and, try out that idea that you had, try out that business idea you wanted, try out that new hobby you wanted to try. The more comfortable you feel, in that state, you're not going to be able to achieve those things. And it's all about trying to understand if your comfort equates to contentment, because I do think that there is a difference between comfort and contentment. And that's the line that's going to defer, me being able to live for 60 years doing the exact same thing I'm doing. If that life brings me contentment, gives me peace and joy, and makes me filled with love, then that's a beautiful life to lead. And it's not as though I have to start a multi-million-dollar company or do anything of that nature to make my life worth something. Like, that's not what I'm saying at all. However, I feel like there is a difference between that sense of contentment and the alternative of me being like, wow, okay, another 10 years spent in this dead-end job where I'm not going to grow or do anything. Another 10 years of doing whatever and I'm not going to do anything. And now I'm going to draw it back to the self-sabotaging episode, because I think it really applies here as well. What's the biggest thing that is screaming up at you when I said that? Another 5 years and I'm still at this job. Another 5 years and I'm still at this job. Another 5 years and I'm still at this job. I am just almost wallowing and reaffirming my distaste, my dislike for this current reality that I'm living in, this current circumstance. I'm saying, another 5 years, but am I doing anything to try to leap out of that? Another 5 years at this dead-end job. I know, in my sentence, I know that it's a dead-end job and I know that I'm not going anywhere. But what am I going to do? Just stay another 5 years at this dead-end job? And what am I going to do? Put in another 5 years. At a certain point, it needs to come from you. And this was my original kind of angle I was going to take this episode from, is that it has to come from you. Changing your life, transforming your life, transforming the way that you lead your life, transforming the way you feel living your life, it has to come from you. And I feel like self-help books, self-help podcasts like this are facilitators. They're facilitators. They're going to exacerbate your efforts in trying to get there. But at the end of the day, it has to come from you. And I feel like hearing that quote about they were sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I was like, wait a minute, that's right. And the thing is, in that sentence, they're affirming, Anne Mallon, what is it, her name? Okay, so I just realized that the recording on this mic isn't working. So if you're listening on Spotify, I apologize. The sound quality is not going to be the greatest. But I'm not going to restart. So we're going to move on and we're just not going to have the mic. But that's totally fine as long as this video is still recording. Yes, it does seem like it is. So I do apologize for the sound quality on this episode, you guys. It was a total mistake when I went to go look for the woman's name on Spotify. I should have known that Spotify would kick me off the recording platform. So my mistake, but we're going to keep pushing. So Anne Mallon, her saying, they were sick and tired of being sick and tired. She is affirming that it is a choice. It is a choice to remain in that circumstance. It is a choice to remain in that pattern of thinking. What they say is that every day is a new beginning. The past you, yesterday's you, no longer exists. You literally only have the present. That is the only tangible. So what is tangible is something that you can actually control. You can't control the abstract. Oh, yesterday I did this. Oh, tomorrow I may do that. You can try to influence the future and you can dwell on the past. But the only thing that is within your power to control is the very present moment. And so when you're saying, I am sick and tired of being sick and tired, you're noticing that I am in a position to alleviate this particular circumstance. Because it could be, I'm fine being sick and tired. I'm comfortable being sick and tired. It's a choice. And another big thing that inspired me for this episode was a YouTube video I watched this morning on the treadmill. The video is called Inside the Mind of a Winner, Sports Psychologist Bill Beswick, Trained to Dominate. Now, I wanted to watch this video. I clicked on it because I wanted to get more into the mind of these people who have a lot of drive, a lot of ambition. And one of the biggest things that he said, the biggest quote that stuck with me from that video. So when you wake up in the morning, right, the first thing you do when you wake up is think, am I going to be a fighter or am I going to be a victim? A lot of the time, especially when it comes to self-sabotaging and when it comes to being in a negative circumstance, living a life that doesn't inspire you, living a life that doesn't inspire joy, that doesn't inspire laughter, is that we can almost be chained, locked and chained into this victim mentality. We can think to ourselves, wow, like I just really hate the way that this job is making me feel. Like I really hate, where I live, I really hate my roommates, I really hate my room, I really hate my degree, I really hate my job. I already said that, but this can be the kind of monologue that we play. And it's common, as we saw with the law of assumption, the law of attraction, it's going to be exacerbated because your thoughts are everything. So when you hear a sports psychologist, the mind of a winner, this guy has won constantly, or his team has, right? When you hear that his biggest piece of advice is to think to yourself in the morning and do I want to be a fighter or do I want to be a victim? That is immediately putting an emphasis on the role of your thoughts, on your capacity to achieve your goals and have that drive, have that ambition. It can be so difficult to get outside of that victim mentality, but I think that almost labeling it as such, self-awareness is the first step. That's what they always say. If you can notice that that's the turn your thoughts are taking, that that's the narrative that you are telling yourself. It's constantly, this is terrible in my life. This is terrible in my life. This is terrible in my life. It's like personal offenses, left, right, and center, left, right, and center, left, right, and center. But are you fighting? Are you pushing? Are you trying to find alternatives? Are you trying to push outside the boundaries? Are you trying to push back when somebody says something negative to you? Are you going to be a fighter or a victim today? And I think that that's really important to think about also, how your attitude is something that you have the power to control. It just is. And I think a lot of the time, especially with a lot of leeway being given, and this is controversial. I will pivot and say that this is controversial to say. This is just my opinion, right? This is my opinion. However, I do think that in today's day and age, we give a lot of leeway for mental health and for saying, this is a really bad mental health day. I have this disease, I have this, no diagnoses in sight. It's like, okay, now that I know that I can say that I have this and people will automatically assume less of me, I'm going to go with this. And not to say that there aren't people out there who have true diagnoses, who have true chemical imbalances, and that is important to treat. And these assumptions are made off of, real things. I think that it gives a lot of leeway for the rest of us to also assume those identities and place them with ourselves to further exacerbate the story that we're telling ourselves. So if I am experiencing a deep loss of ambition and drive, and I'm having a really rough day, week, month, and I'm telling myself, I must be depressed. I literally must be depressed. Nothing really has happened. I was fine before, leading up to this month, right? But everything sucks. And so this and this and this, then you're telling yourself, okay, so I must be depressed this very moment, and then you tell yourself that. And so then your actual behavior, your actual mind is going to prove that to you. It's just going to get worse. But your attitude and your state of mind is something that you can shove. You can push and shove it in different directions. And going back to last week's episode on, is laughter a healer, right? If you guys didn't check that one out, you definitely should. But in last week's episode, we discussed how laughter can be a major, major healing, tool when it comes to disease, big and small. And one of the big things that stuck with me from that book, The Secret, that I mentioned in that episode, is that when you are in moments of high stress and moments of high doubt and moments where you're finding it really difficult to be grateful, be joyful, be light in your heart, in this whole chapter on laughter in medicine, they were saying, if you're noticing that you're taking a little bit too much time focusing on your disease, switch it up. Put a show on immediately. Put a new show on immediately that's going to help you change your mind. Call a friend that's going to make you laugh a little. It's all your decision. The resources are in front of you. And so it's all about reaching out and taking it. And an attitude change is something anybody is capable of. Anybody is capable of. It would be insane to think that we have no control over our attitude. Where would that leave us? Another big thing, honestly, I think, is that your surroundings matter so much. When you are surrounded by people who want to, maintain their spot in life, maintain this place where you are unhappy. The point is that they might be content, but you might be feeling that frustration. If you are surrounding yourself with people who don't align with where your contentment stands, then it's really important to be able to shift that. Be able to make that distance and find your way to people who are going to build on that inspiration. And honestly, I think that's where YouTube really comes in again, because YouTube is such an amazing tool because of how much range of content is on there. And I feel like I'm only really tapping in to the good side of YouTube that I want to be on right now. And it was honestly thanks to an influencer I follow called Eden is someone that I look up to. Eden Meslia is who it is. And I look up to her so much because she is living the life that I have always dreamt of. This is my vision board. I look at her and I see myself. I look at her and I'm like, this is where I'm going to be at some point. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but as long as I remember that this is a possibility, an option for where this Sydney ends up, I look at her and I'm like, okay, like this is just like, I'm just drawing inspiration, right? But a big thing that she came up with recently, because she also has been hit with this point where she's like, okay, wait, I've been distracted. She's working, she's putting in the work, she's posting her content, but at the very end of the day, she's like, wait, I've been distracted. I'm not doing as much as I really could be doing. I'm not committing to this as much as I could be doing. I'm not putting in as much work as I could be doing. And self-awareness is the first step. She said that. She came online, she posted an uncut video, essentially. And I really, really appreciated that transparency above all as well. She came on and she said to the camera, she was like, I'm putting my foot down. I'm putting my foot down with myself. And I am going to commit to all of these healthy steps that is going to help me build momentum with my drive, with my ambition, and help me pivot back into this path that I have for myself, into the growth that I want to achieve. And she said this, but she also mentioned that one of the biggest things that she wanted to do was shift away from short form content into more long form content. And why is this important in a conversation about drive and ambition? Is that short form content at the very end of the day is content overload. Saturation. When you are constantly scrolling, no idea is going to stick long enough to make an impression that can transform into a creative project or a business idea or a pivot into a hobby that you might want to pick up or anything like that. When it's short form, you look, it's like, oh wow, that'd be fun, scroll. You look, oh, that'd be fun, scroll. You look, obviously, no good can come from that. No good can come from that except for overconsumption and, capitalism. And so when we're looking at long form content, I think it opens up even more of a door, especially when you go and set out onto your, entertainment platforms with that goal. Because I've discovered a lot about myself, even in this past week, just about what I like to consume. I've always watched podcasts. I love watching the influencers, of course, and it's always been kind of a form of escapism for me at the end of the day, getting my giggles in, kind of in that kind of form. But with this, idea that I was inspired by Eden by, of focusing more on long form content, I have found that my intake of content almost tosses it back to my interests that I had when I was back in like 2013, when I was 10, 11, 12, 13. Like, what did I really love watching and thinking about and researching about? It was interior design. It was, fashion. It's history about fashion, architecture. So that's kind of where my content has kind of come back to. And it's so interesting to see what you are left with at the end of the day when you strip away the 3-minute videos, 2-minute videos, 30-second videos, and try to aim 40 minutes up. What am I watching? What is going to keep my attention? What is going to make me think? What is going to inspire me? What is going to exacerbate that drive, that ambition, keep me on my feet? And so that's been another big, pivot when it comes to leaning into this whole drive and ambition thing. The last point I wanted to check on is that when it comes to ambition and drive, and this is something that I took away from that YouTube video about the sports psychologist, Ben Beswick, I believe his name was. And it's that a lot of people with drive and ambition are going to be, a lot of the time, in isolation. It's going to result in a lot of alone time and a lot of building time. But I feel like the perspective that we have on this should be one of self-care. Because at the end of the day, you investing in yourself, you spending time on yourself, you committing to yourself and your wants and your desires, you committing to the bit that you want to achieve, that is self-care. And it might even be one of the highest forms of self-care. And I think that we forget that. We almost need to think about it almost like a butterfly in its cocoon. Pre-caterpillar, we are in our shell, we're in our cocoon, our nest. And in this nest, we build, we chip, we stone, we carve. And in doing so, even though we're spending it alone, it is self-care and it is self-attention. And self-respect comes from that. And so I feel like time spent alone, another big, part of achieving ambition, being able to tap back into that ambition and drive. And I don't know if this episode completely made sense or had a very storytelling, avenue, but I hope that you guys still enjoyed. Again, I really, really apologize for the auditory issues. I hope that the sound is still pretty good. I'm trying to project in a good way. But I hope that you guys enjoyed this week's episode, and I will see you next week. Don't forget to reach out. Let me know your thoughts. And it's totally fine if you have to, I touched on a little bit of a controversial point or two in the episode, so please let me know your thoughts. It's at KalopsiaPod, KalopsiaPod on Instagram and TikTok. And at Sydney Jotita, at SYDNEYDJOTITA on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. And I sincerely hope that you guys enjoyed this week's episode, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.